The dust-laden horizon stretched endlessly before Penelope Rowe as she stood motionless at the freshly dug grave, the second tiny wooden cross to join the first within a year's time, her empty arms aching with a peculiar weightlessness that made her feel as though she might float away into the vast Montana sky if not for the heaviness anchoring her heart to the earth. The year was 1873, and Clearwater Springs, Montana Territory, was experiencing one of its hottest summers on record. The blistering sun scorched the earth, turning the once vibrant prairie grass a pale, sickly yellow. Penelope Rowe, 24 years old with eyes that had aged decades in the past 2 years, refused the townswomen's offers to accompany her to the cemetery. This was a journey she needed to make alone, just as she had done 6 months prior. Her fingers traced the rough edges of the small wooden cross bearing the name, Joshua Rowe, beloved son, 1873. Next to it stood an identical marker, Jacob Rowe, beloved son, 1872. Both had lived fewer than 3 months in this harsh world. The whispers had started after Jacob's death, hushed conversations that ceased when Penelope entered the general store or passed by the church. After Joshua's passing, the whispers transformed into blatant stares and crossed fingers when she walked by. Clearwater Springs was a God-fearing town, but fear took many forms, and the unexplained deaths of 2 infants born to the same mother had the townspeople seeking explanations beyond medical science. "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away," Reverend Miller had said at the funeral earlier that day, but Penelope had caught the uncertainty in his voice, the way his eyes never quite met hers during the brief service. Her husband Thomas hadn't been uncertain. He had been gone for 2 weeks now, departed in the night without a word, leaving only a hastily scrawled note. "I cannot bear this curse any longer." The ink had been smudged with what might have been tears or whiskey. Penelope couldn't tell which. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. She didn't turn, assuming it was Mrs. Patterson coming to check on her despite her requests for solitude. The widow Patterson had been the only person in town who still treated Penelope with kindness rather than suspicion. "Mrs. Rowe." The deep voice was unfamiliar. Penelope turned slowly, shielding her eyes from the setting sun with one hand. A tall figure sat atop a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the golden light. "Yes." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, raspy from disuse. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as his boots hit the ground. He approached slowly, respectfully keeping his distance from the graves.
"I'm William James,
new foreman at the Crawford Ranch." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "I wanted to pay my respects." Mr. Crawford mentioned what happened. Penelope studied him. Tall and broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His brown hair was flecked with gold from the sun, and he held his hat in calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Thank you, Mr. James, but that wasn't necessary." She turned back to the graves. "Most folks in town prefer to keep their distance from me these days." William James stepped closer, his shadow falling across the small graves. "I'm not most folks, Mrs. Rowe, and I don't put much stock in town gossip." Something in his steady voice made Penelope look up at him again. There was no pity in his expression, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "The world takes enough from us without us taking kindness from each other," he said softly. For the first time in months, Penelope felt something other than grief or emptiness stir within her. It wasn't happiness, she was far from that, but perhaps it was the first spark of something that might eventually lead there. "I should head back before dark," she said, gathering her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "May I escort you to town, Mrs. Rowe? These paths can be treacherous at dusk." Penelope hesitated. Being seen with her might not do the newcomer any favors with the townspeople. "I wouldn't want to be a burden." "No burden at all." William offered a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Besides, I've been riding fence all day. Some conversation would be welcome. As they walked side by side, William leading his horse by the reins, Penelope found herself telling him about her small cabin on the edge of town, about the garden she tended that was still producing vegetables despite the drought, about anything except the 2 small graves they'd left behind. William listened attentively, occasionally sharing stories of his own journeys across the territories. By the time they reached the road that led to Penelope's cabin, the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. James." "William, please." "William." She nodded.
I'm Penelope.
"I know your journey's been hard, Penelope. If you need anything firewood chopped, repairs around your place, I'm at the Crawford Ranch most days, but Sundays I'm free. Why would you help me?" The words came out more bluntly than she intended. "You must have heard what they say about me in town." William settled his hat back on his head, his expression serious. "My mother lost 3 children before I was born. Back in Ohio, the neighbors said she was cursed too. But my father never believed it, and neither did I when I was old enough to understand. Sometimes tragedy just happens, and people need an explanation that makes sense to them, even if it's wrong." Penelope stared at him, speechless. "Good night, Mrs. Rowe." William tipped his hat and mounted his horse. "Remember what I said about Sunday." As he rode away, Penelope remained standing in the road, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, something she couldn't yet name, but that felt strangely like hope. The following week passed in a blur of routine for Penelope. She tended her garden, cleaned her small cabin repeatedly until every surface gleamed, and avoided town as much as possible. When she did venture in for supplies, she kept her eyes forward, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her through the dusty streets. At the general store, Mrs. Montgomery deliberately stepped back when Penelope approached the counter, as if whatever affliction had taken her babies might be contagious. Mr. Montgomery, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed by his wife's behavior. "Just these items today, Mrs. Rowe?" he asked, tallying her modest purchases: flour, coffee, sugar, and a small piece of hard candy that she would savor over several evenings. "Yes, thank you." She placed her coins on the counter rather than handing them directly to him, a habit she developed to spare others the discomfort of touching her. The bell above the door jangled, and the store fell momentarily silent as William James entered, ducking his head slightly under the doorframe. He nodded politely to the room at large before spotting Penelope at the counter. "Mrs. Rowe, good afternoon." His smile was warm and entirely unconcerned with the stares now directed at both of them. "Mr. James." She nodded, gathering her purchases. "Heading back to your place? I've got the wagon today, if you'd like a ride." Penelope could feel the weight of the townspeople's attention. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, was practically craning her neck to overhear their conversation from behind the fabric display. "That's very kind, but I can manage." William leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The offer stands. And my Sunday offer as well, if you've given it any thought." Before Penelope could respond, Mrs. Montgomery interjected, her voice carrying deliberately through the store. "Mr. James, I don't believe we've been properly introduced."
I'm Harriet Montgomery.
"My husband owns this establishment." She extended her hand, positioning herself between William and Penelope. "We're having a small gathering this Sunday after church. Nothing fancy, just some of the town's leading families. We'd be honored if you'd join us." William shook her hand briefly. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Montgomery, but I've already made commitments for Sunday." His eyes flicked to Penelope, who was quietly edging toward the door. "Perhaps another time." Mrs. Montgomery's smile tightened. "Of course. Though I should mention purely out of neighborly concern that you're new to our community, and first impressions are so important. I've always found that making my own impressions serves me better than adopting others," William replied evenly. "Good day, Mrs. Montgomery." "Mr. Montgomery." He tipped his hat and followed Penelope outside. The bright sunlight momentarily blinded Penelope as she stepped onto the boardwalk. She blinked rapidly, clutching her paper-wrapped parcels to her chest. Mrs. Rowe, Penelope. William caught up to her in 2 long strides. About that ride? She looked up at him, noting the stubborn set of his jaw. You shouldn't have done that. Done what? Snubbed, Mrs. Montgomery. Spoken to me in front of everyone like that.
They'll talk.
William's eyebrows rose. Let them. I've never much cared for gossip. You're new here. You don't understand how small towns work. I understand perfectly well. William's voice remained gentle despite the firmness of his words. I grew up in a town smaller than this one. But I also understand that no one deserves to be treated the way they're treating you. Penelope felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. She hadn't cried since Joshua's funeral, and she wouldn't start now, not on the main street of Clearwater Springs with half the town probably watching from behind curtained windows. The wagon's just there, William said, gesturing to a battered but serviceable farm wagon hitched to 2 sturdy draft horses. Please. It's a hot day for walking. The simple kindness nearly undid her. Penelope nodded wordlessly and allowed William to help her up to the seat. As they pulled away from the store, she could see Mrs. Montgomery's disapproving face at the window. Thank you, she said finally as they left the main street behind. William handled the reins with easy confidence. No need for thanks. I meant what I said about Sunday, though. I noticed your porch railing is loose, and that roof could use some attention before winter. I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. Then why? The question that had been burning in her mind since their meeting at the cemetery finally burst forth. Why would you help me when everyone else in town crosses the street to avoid me? William was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the road ahead. When I was 16, my father died in a mining accident. My mother and I had nothing. The bank took our farm. But a man I barely knew, my father's old trail boss from his cattle driving days, he gave us a place to stay, helped me find work. Didn't ask for anything in return, just said that someday I should do the same for someone else. He glanced at her. Seems to me you could use a friend right now, Penelope Rowe. A friend. The word sounded foreign after months of isolation. Penelope stared at her hands, noting the garden dirt beneath her fingernails, the calluses from work that never seemed to end despite having no one to do it for anymore. I would appreciate help with the roof, she said finally. And perhaps some company for Sunday dinner, if you wouldn't mind. William's smile lit up his entire face. I'd like that very much. Sunday dawned clear and bright, with a hint of autumn crispness that belied the summer heat of the afternoon to come. Penelope rose before dawn, unable to sleep with the knowledge that she would have a visitor for the first time in months. She swept the already clean floors, polished the small stove until it gleamed, and spent precious coffee grounds brewing a pot stronger than her usual watered-down version. The garden yielded fresh carrots, potatoes, and late-season tomatoes. She had traded eggs from her few remaining chickens for a small roast at the butcher's the day before, ignoring the butcher's wife's obvious relief when she left the shop. Now the meat simmered in her mother's Dutch oven, filling the cabin with a savory aroma that reminded Penelope of happier times. By noon, she had changed her dress twice, finally settling on her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton that Thomas had once said matched her eyes. She brushed her brown hair until it shone and pinned it up in a neat bun, then caught herself staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. This is not that kind of visit, she told her reflection sternly. William James was being kind, nothing more. A man like him, strong, handsome, respected already despite his short time in Clearwater Springs, would have no interest in a woman the town had labeled cursed. A widow with 2 dead babies and a husband who'd fled in the night. The sound of a wagon approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Penelope straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the porch just as William brought his wagon to a halt in front of her cabin. He had dressed for the occasion as well, she noted. His usual work clothes had been replaced by clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that looked freshly pressed. His hat was the same, though, and his boots still bore the dust of the range, as if he couldn't quite transform completely into a town gentleman. Mrs. Rowe. He tipped his hat, a warm smile creasing his face. I hope I'm not too early. Not at all, Mr. James. And please, it's Penelope. William, then. He reached into the wagon bed and produced a wooden toolbox and several lengths of lumber. Thought I'd tackle that porch rail first, if that's all right with you. Of course. Dinner won't be ready for another hour or so. She gestured to the porch, where 2 support posts were indeed listing dangerously. I've been meaning to fix that since spring. William set to work with the efficiency of a man accustomed to solving practical problems. Penelope brought him a cup of coffee, then retreated inside to check on the roast, leaving the door ajar so they could converse while he worked. How are you finding Clearwater Springs? She called from the stove. William's hammer paused briefly. It's good cattle country. The Crawford spread is well managed, though they could use some improvements to their water systems before next summer. And the people? This time the pause was longer. Some are welcoming. Others are reserving judgment. The hammering resumed. I've never been one to worry much about fitting in. That's apparent, Penelope said, a smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like years. William appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. Is that a criticism, Mrs. Rowe? An observation, Mr. James. She stirred the stew, avoiding his gaze. Most newcomers to town are eager to be accepted. They wouldn't risk association with the town pariah. William leaned against the doorframe, his expression serious. Is that how you see yourself? Penelope set down her spoon with deliberate care. It's how everyone sees me. That poor cursed woman who lost 2 babies and drove her husband away. They cross themselves when I walk by, William. Not everyone believes in curses. In a town like this, most do. She turned to face him fully. Why don't you? And don't tell me it's just because of your mother's experience. Plenty of people who've suffered still believe in superstition. William studied her for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. I've seen too much of the world to believe that misfortune falls only on those who deserve it, or that it follows some pattern we can predict or avoid. Good people suffer. Bad people prosper. Sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it. That's a bleak view. Is it? I find it freeing. He stepped further into the cabin, his tall frame making the space seem suddenly smaller. If we're not being punished by fate or God or whatever name people give to the forces they fear, then we're free to make our own way forward, without carrying the weight of imagined sins. Penelope felt something shift inside her, like ice breaking on a frozen river. I've been carrying that weight for so long, she whispered. Sometimes I wonder if they're right. If I did something to deserve this. You didn't. William's voice was firm, brooking no argument. What happened to your children was a tragedy, not a punishment. And what your husband did, leaving you to face it alone, that speaks to his character, not yours. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, and this time she couldn't blink them away. They spilled down her cheeks in hot trails as months of pent-up grief and shame broke free. She turned away, embarrassed, only to feel a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's all right to cry, Penelope. She shook her head fiercely. I told myself I was done with tears. They don't change anything. No, they don't. But holding them in doesn't change anything either. His hand remained steady on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. My father used to say tears are like a summer storm, they clear the air. A sob escaped her then, followed by another. William guided her to one of the kitchen chairs and sat her down, then knelt beside her, his hand still on her shoulder, saying nothing as she wept for her babies, for her failed marriage, for the life she had imagined that had crumbled to dust. When the storm passed, leaving her drained but somehow lighter, William quietly fetched her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. She wiped her eyes, mortified. "I'm so sorry, don't apologize." He rose and moved to the stove where the stew was starting to bubble over. Calmly, he adjusted the heat and stirred it as if he'd been cooking in her kitchen for years. "This smells wonderful." Penelope watched him, bewildered by his easy acceptance of her breakdown and his natural way of moving past it without making her feel ashamed. "It was my mother's recipe." "Well, your mother was clearly a fine cook." William glanced at her, his smile returning. "Now, how about I finish that porch rail while you collect yourself, and then we can enjoy this meal you've prepared?" Penelope nodded, grateful for his tact. As he returned to his work outside, she splashed cold water on her face and pinched her cheeks to bring back some color. The woman in the mirror looked different, somehow still sad, still marked by loss, but perhaps a little less haunted. By the time William returned, declaring the porch rail secure enough to withstand a stampede, Penelope had set the table with her best dishes and composed herself. They ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than she would have thought possible, touching on everything from the changing weather to William's travels across the Western Territories before settling in Montana. "What brought you to Clearwater Springs specifically?" Penelope asked as they shared the apple pie she'd baked that morning. "It's hardly on the main routes." William's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Honestly, I was passing through on my way to Oregon when my horse came up lame just outside of town. While I was waiting for him to heal, I heard the Crawford Ranch needed experienced hands." He shrugged. "Seemed like as good a place as any to stop for a while." "And now, will you move on when winter comes?" "That depends." His eyes met hers across the table. "On whether I find reasons to stay." The air between them suddenly felt charged, like the stillness before a lightning strike. Penelope looked away first, busying herself with clearing the plates. "Thank you for fixing the porch," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And for the company." William helped her clear the table, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked together in the small kitchen space. Each accidental touch sent a jolt through Penelope that both thrilled and terrified her. "I should look at that roof before I go," William said as they finished washing the dishes. "Storm season will be here before you know it." They stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight. Penelope shaded her eyes as William assessed the roof with a professional gaze. "It's not too bad. Some missing shingles on the north side. I can fix it next Sunday if that suits you." "You don't have to keep coming back," Penelope said, though the thought of another Sunday alone made her heart sink. "You've done more than enough already." William turned to face her, his expression serious. "What if I want to come back?" "Why would you?" "Because I enjoy your company, Penelope Rowe." He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Because when I talk to you, I don't feel like I need to be anyone other than who I am." Penelope stared at him, searching for any sign of pity or deceit and finding none. "The town will talk. Let them. I've never cared much for other people's opinions of my personal affairs." "Is that what this is? A personal affair?" William's smile was slow and deliberate. "I'd like it to be. If you would." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for
that.
For any of it. It's too soon after." She gestured vaguely, encompassing all the loss that had defined her recent life. "I understand." William nodded, his disappointment visible but restrained.
"Friendship, then."
"For now." "Friendship," Penelope agreed, finding the idea both safer and somehow more precious than what he seemed to be offering. "I could use a friend." "Then I'll see you next Sunday." William placed his hat back on his head and gathered his tools. "Thank you for dinner, Penelope. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed a meal that much." As he drove away, Penelope remained on her newly repaired porch, watching until his wagon disappeared around the bend in the road. The emptiness of the cabin behind her suddenly seemed more pronounced than before, as if William's presence had filled spaces she hadn't realized were vacant. Friendship, she told herself firmly. That was all this could be. All it should be. But as she went about her evening chores, she found herself humming a tune she hadn't sung since before Jacob was born, and planning improvements to next week's Sunday dinner. The next few weeks established a pattern. William would arrive midday on Sunday, tools in hand, and work on whatever repair Penelope's small homestead needed, most the roof one week, the chicken coop the next, the well pump after that. They would share the meals she prepared, talking easily about everything and nothing, carefully avoiding the topics that might disrupt their growing friendship, her past losses, his future plans. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of changing leaves. It also brought renewed attention from the town, as William's regular visits to Penelope's cabin became impossible to ignore. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Penelope ventured into town for supplies, her list longer than usual as she planned a special meal for the upcoming Sunday William's birthday, which he had mentioned offhandedly the week before. She had just selected a small cut of beef at the butcher's when Mrs. Patterson approached her, concern evident in her kind face. "Penelope, dear, could we speak privately?" Surprised by the formal request from the one townsperson who had remained consistently friendly, Penelope nodded. They stepped into the alley beside the butcher's shop, away from curious ears. "I don't wish to overstep," Mrs. Patterson began, twisting her handkerchief nervously, "but as someone who cares about your welfare, I feel I must say something. People are talking about Mr. James's regular visits to your home." "People have been talking about me for a long time, Mrs. Patterson," Penelope replied, trying to keep the defensiveness from her voice. "This is hardly new." "Yes, but this is different. Your reputation. My reputation was destroyed when my second child died," Penelope interrupted, more sharply than she intended. "What more can they possibly say about me?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with sympathy. "They're saying you've bewitched him, dear. That the same curse that took your babies will bring misfortune to him. And they're saying worse things about your arrangement." Penelope felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. "There is no arrangement. William is helping with repairs I can't manage alone. We share a meal afterward. That's all." "I believe you," Mrs. Patterson said quickly. "But others are less charitable in their assumptions. Mr. James is well regarded at the Crawford Ranch. He has prospects here. I would hate to see his reputation tarnished because of these rumors." The implication was clear. Penelope's hands tightened around her market basket. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Patterson. I'll keep it in mind." As she continued her shopping, Penelope was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed her through town. Outside the general store, she overheard Mrs. Montgomery speaking to the banker's wife. "Completely inappropriate, a single man calling on a widow like that, and her with that history. Heard Crawford is reconsidering making him foreman permanently because of it." Penelope hurried her steps, her cheeks burning. By the time she reached home, her mind was made up. She couldn't allow William to damage his future in Clearwater Springs by associating with her. When Sunday came, she would tell him not to return. The decision made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. In just a few short weeks, William's visits had become the center around which her life revolved. The thought of returning to her solitary existence felt unbearable, but she couldn't be selfish. Not when it might cost William the respect he'd earned and the position he deserved. Sunday arrived with leaden skies that matched Penelope's mood. She prepared the special meal anyway: roast beef, potatoes, carrots, and an apple cake for dessert, telling herself it would serve as a proper farewell. She had just removed the cake from the oven when she heard the now familiar sound of William's wagon. He appeared at her door with a broader smile than usual and a small package wrapped in brown paper tucked under one arm. "Something smells wonderful," he said by way of greeting, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Happy birthday," Penelope replied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. I hope you're hungry.
Starving.
Crawford had us moving cattle to the lower pastures all week. He placed the package on the table. This is for you. For me? But it's your birthday. William shrugged, suddenly looking almost shy. I saw it in the general store and thought of you. Go on, open it. Penelope carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. How did you know I love poetry? You quoted Wordsworth last week when we were watching the sunset. I thought you might enjoy some verses by a woman's hand for a change. William watched her face intently. Do you like it? It's beautiful. Thank you. Penelope clutched the book to her chest, her resolve weakening. How could she send away someone who noticed such things about her, who brought her gifts that spoke to her soul rather than her circumstances? But then she remembered Mrs. Patterson's warning and Mrs. Montgomery's whispers. With reluctance, she set the book aside and gestured to the table. Dinner is ready. We should eat while it's hot. Throughout the meal, William regaled her with stories of his week at the ranch, his enthusiasm for the work evident in every word. Penelope listened, committing his expressions to memory, knowing this would be the last time she would see the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed or how he gestured with his fork when making a point. When they had finished the cake and the dishes were washed and put away, Penelope knew she could delay no longer. They stood on the porch, watching the gray clouds scud across the sky, a comfortable silence between them that she was about to shatter. William, there's something I need to say. He turned to her, eyebrows raised. That sounds serious. It is. Penelope took a deep breath. I think it would be best if you didn't come here anymore. William's expression froze, then darkened. May I ask why? People are talking. About us. About you visiting me here. It's affecting how they see you. She couldn't meet his eyes. Mrs. Patterson told me Mr. Crawford is reconsidering making you foreman because of it. Is that so? William's voice was carefully neutral. You have a future here, William. A good one. I won't be the reason you lose that. And what about what I want? There was an edge to his voice now. Don't I get a say in this decision? Penelope finally looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. You're being kind, and I appreciate that more than I can say. But this town will never accept me. They've decided I'm cursed, dangerous. If you tie yourself to me, even as a friend, you'll carry that taint too. I don't care what they think. You should. This is your home now. William ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Penelope, do you want me to stop coming here? Not because of what others think or say, but because it's what you want. The question caught her off guard. Did she want him to stop? The answer was simple and immediate, no. In the short time she'd known him, William had brought light back into her world, had made her feel something other than grief and shame. The thought of losing that connection made her chest ache. No, she admitted softly, but what I want doesn't matter. It matters to me. William stepped closer, his gaze intense. Everything about you matters to me, Penelope Rowe. Something in his voice made her breath catch. William, let me finish. I came to Clearwater Springs by chance. I stayed because the work was good and the land felt right. But these past few weeks, being with you, that's become the reason I want to build a life here. He took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I'm falling in love with you, Penelope. And no amount of town gossip is going to change that. Penelope stared at him, her heart thundering in her chest. You can't love me. I'm broken, William. My body couldn't keep my babies alive. My husband couldn't bear to stay with me. I have nothing to offer you but heartache and whispers behind your back. That's not true. William's grip on her hand tightened. You offer me your strength, yes, strength, Penelope. Do you know how much courage it takes to keep going after what you've been through? You offer me your kindness, your intelligence, your gentle heart. And if you'll let me, I'll spend as long as it takes proving to you that you're not cursed or broken. You're just a woman who's endured more sorrow than anyone should have to bear." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to hope. Afraid to believe that anything good can last." "I know." William lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "But I'm not asking you to be fearless. I'm just asking you to let me stay by your side while you find your courage again." A single tear spilled over, tracing a path down her cheek. William caught it with his thumb, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you let me court you properly, Penelope Rowe? Not in secret, not with shame, but openly and honorably." Penelope closed her eyes, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safe, familiar path of isolation and measured expectations. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also the possibility of joy, of connection, of a future she had thought forever closed to her. "Yes," she said finally, opening her eyes to find William watching her with such tenderness it made her heart ache anew. "Yes, I will." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. Without warning, he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle, his laughter mingling with her startled gasp. "William James, put me down this instant." He complied, but kept his arms around her waist, his face alight with happiness. "I should warn you, Penelope, once I set my mind to something, I'm remarkably persistent." "I've noticed," she replied dryly, though she couldn't suppress her own smile, small and tentative as it was. "The entire town will be scandalized. Let them be. We'll give them something worth talking about." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss, so gentle it felt like a question. Penelope answered by rising on her toes to deepen the contact, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as something long dormant awakened within her. When they parted, both slightly breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. "I should go before this gets improper," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Yes, you should," Penelope agreed, equally reluctant to step away. Eventually, propriety won out. William collected his hat and tools, promising to return the following Sunday. As Penelope watched him drive away, her lips still tingling from his kiss, she felt a curious lightness in her chest, as if some of the grief she had carried for so long had begun to lift. Inside, she picked up the book of poetry he had given her and opened it to find a pressed wildflower marking a page. The poem it marked spoke of hope, that thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Penelope traced the words with her fingertip, allowing herself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future filled with something other than solitude and sorrow. News of William's formal courtship spread through Clearwater Springs like wildfire. By Monday afternoon, it seemed the entire town was discussing the unlikely pair, the cursed widow and the promising young foreman from the Crawford Ranch. Reactions were mixed. Some, like Mrs. Patterson, expressed cautious approval, though tinged with concern. Others, led by Mrs. Montgomery and her circle, were openly critical, predicting disaster for William and renewing their whispered theories about Penelope's supposed curse.
Mr.
Crawford himself stopped by the cabin on Wednesday, ostensibly to deliver a message from his wife about the upcoming harvest festival, but clearly to assess the situation for himself. Penelope invited him in for coffee, determined to face the scrutiny with dignity. "William speaks very highly of you, Mrs. Rowe," Crawford said, accepting the cup she offered. He was a barrel-chested man with a no-nonsense manner that had served him well in building one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. "Says you're the strongest woman he's ever met." Penelope flushed at the compliment. "William is kind. He's direct, is what he is. Never minces words." Crawford studied her over the rim of his cup. "He also told me to mind my own business when I asked about his intentions toward you." Despite her nervousness, Penelope couldn't help a small smile. That sounded like William. And yet here you are. Indeed. Crawford set down his cup. William's the best hand I've had in years. Born horseman, good with cattle, respected by the other men. I'm planning to make him foreman permanently when Johnson retires next spring. That's wonderful. He'll do an excellent job. Yes, he will. If he stays. Crawford's gaze sharpened. You understand my concern, Mrs. Rowe. Good men are hard to find in these parts. Penelope straightened her spine. If you're concerned that I'll somehow lure William away from your ranch, Mr. Crawford, you needn't worry. I have no intention of interfering with his work. That's not my concern. Crawford leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. My concern is that this town can be hard on people who don't conform to its expectations. William doesn't care about that. He's always been his own man. But I wonder if you're prepared for what's coming. Penelope considered his words. You mean the gossip? The stares? I've endured worse, Mr. Crawford. Not just that. William's serious about you. Anyone with eyes can see that. But are you serious about him? Because if this is just a temporary comfort for you, a way to ease your loneliness, I'd ask you to end it now before he gets in any deeper. The blunt question took Penelope aback. My feelings for William are genuine, she said after a moment. I wouldn't toy with his affections. Crawford nodded, apparently satisfied.
Good.
Because that man deserves happiness, and for some reason, he thinks he'll find it with you. He rose to leave, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Mrs. Rowe, I don't put stock in curses. Never have. My wife lost our first child before we came west. Sometimes bad things just happen. The unexpected support from such a respected figure left Penelope momentarily speechless. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. After he left, Penelope sat for a long time at her kitchen table, turning the conversation over in her mind. Crawford's visit, while uncomfortable, had clarified something important. She needed to be certain of her feelings for William, not just grateful for his attention. The last thing she wanted was to cause him pain. The question lingered with her through the week as she went about her chores. By the time Sunday arrived again, bringing William to her door with a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers and his now familiar warm smile, Penelope had her answer. The way her heart leapt at the sight of him, the sense of rightness she felt in his presence, this was more than gratitude or comfort. This was the beginning of love. Their courtship progressed through the autumn with a quiet intensity that belied the gossip swirling around them. William called on Penelope 3 times a week now, Sunday afternoons for dinner, Wednesday evenings for supper, and Saturday mornings to help with the heavier chores around her small homestead. They were careful to observe the proprieties, always meeting in the open or with her door wide to the world, mindful of Penelope's already precarious reputation. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in late October, William arrived with a picnic basket instead of his usual tools. The work can wait, he declared when Penelope protested. It's the last warm day we're likely to see before winter sets in. I thought we might ride up to Lookout Ridge. The ridge overlooked the entire valley, offering views all the way to the distant mountains. Penelope hesitated, then nodded. Let me get my shawl. They rode double on William's horse, Penelope seated sideways in front of him, acutely aware of his arm around her waist to steady her. The trail wound through golden aspen groves and pine forests until they emerged onto the rocky outcropping that gave the ridge its name. William spread a blanket on a flat section of ground and unpacked the basket: cold chicken, biscuits, apples, and a small jar of honey. They ate in companionable silence, watching clouds cast moving shadows across the valley below. It's beautiful, Penelope said finally, drawing her shawl tighter against the breeze. Thank you for bringing me here. William smiled, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped her bun. I wanted to share it with you. I came up here my first week in Clearwater Springs, trying to decide whether to stay. What made you decide to stay? Penelope asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. At first, it was the land. William gestured toward the valley. There's something about this place wild, but not untamable. Beautiful, but not soft. His eyes returned to her face. Then I met you, and the decision made itself. Penelope felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. Over the past weeks, she had grown accustomed to his touch, his hand at her waist as they walked, his fingers brushing hers as they worked side by side, the occasional chaste kiss goodnight, but the intensity of his feelings still sometimes caught her by surprise. William, there's something I need to ask you. She gathered her courage, knowing the conversation was necessary, but dreading it nonetheless. About the future. He took her hand, his expression turning serious. Ask me anything. Do you want children of your own someday? The question emerged in a rush, the fear behind it evident in her voice. William's hand tightened around hers. Is that what's been troubling you these past few days? Penelope nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I don't know if I can have more children. Or if I should. After Jacob and Joshua, her voice caught. The doctor and Helena said there was no medical reason, but what if they're right? What if I am cursed? Penelope, look at me. William waited until she raised her eyes to his. Yes, I would like children someday. But I want you more. If we're blessed with children, I'll thank God every day. If not, I'll still thank God for bringing you into my life. You say that now, but I say that now and always. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. I've seen how you look at the Johnson twins when we pass them in town. I know you were born to be a mother. But life doesn't always give us what we think we want. Sometimes it gives us something different, but just as valuable. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. I'm so afraid of disappointing you. William shifted closer, gathering her against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. The only way you could disappoint me is by refusing to build a life with me, because you're afraid of what might happen. In the shelter of his arms, with the vast landscape spread before them, Penelope felt her fears begin to recede. Not disappear, she wasn't naive enough to think they would ever fully vanish, but diminish to a manageable size, no longer overwhelming her every thought. I want to build a life with you, she whispered against his shirt. I just need you to understand what you're choosing. William pulled back slightly to look into her face. I understand perfectly. I'm choosing you, Penelope Rowe, with your past and your fears and your incredible strength. I'm choosing the woman who gardens in the rain because the vegetables won't wait, who reads poetry by candlelight, who has endured more heartbreak than most could bear and still finds it in herself to love again. The simple truth in his words undid her. Penelope reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. When did you become so wise? William turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. About the time I fell in love with you. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, carrying all the emotion they had held in check during their careful courtship. When they finally parted, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said softly. Not someday, not when the town approves, but soon. Before winter sets in. Penelope's heart pounded in her chest. That's barely a month away. I know. His eyes held hers, unwavering. But I don't want to wait any longer to make you my wife. To show everyone in Clearwater Springs and beyond that I've chosen you, and you've chosen me, and nothing else matters. In that moment, looking into William's steadfast gaze with the vast sky above them and the valley spreading out below, Penelope felt the last of her hesitation fall away. Whatever came, joy or sorrow, plenty or hardship, they would face it together. Yes, she said simply. I'll marry you, William James. His answering smile was brighter than the autumn sun. William pulled her close again, his kiss a promise that sealed their future together. News of their engagement spread quickly, as all news did in Clearwater Springs. Reactions were predictably mixed. Mrs. Patterson called with a basket of preserves and sincere congratulations. Several of the ranch hands from Crawford's place offered William hearty backslaps and knowing grins. Mr. Montgomery, perhaps sensing a business opportunity that transcended gossip, offered a discount on wedding supplies. Others were less enthusiastic. Mrs. Montgomery's circle now openly crossed the street to avoid Penelope when she ventured into town. Reverend Miller, when approached about performing the ceremony, hemmed and hawed before reluctantly agreeing, though he suggested a quiet service on a weekday rather than the traditional Sunday after church. William, true to his nature, ignored the disapproval. He secured permission from Crawford to build a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough to the main operation for his work, but set apart enough to give them privacy. Construction began immediately, with several of the ranch hands volunteering their help during off hours. Penelope threw herself into preparations for their new home, sewing curtains and quilts, packing her few belongings, and saying a silent farewell to the cabin that had witnessed her greatest joys and deepest sorrows. She would sell it, William had suggested, and use the money to buy furnishings for their new house. A fresh start. 3 weeks before the wedding, as Penelope was checking her supplies at the general store, she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. Letter from his mother in Ohio. Mrs. Montgomery was saying to Mrs. Johnson, her voice carrying deliberately in the small shop. Apparently the James boy was engaged once before, to a girl from a good family. Broke it off suddenly, no explanation. His mother was heartbroken. How strange, Mrs. Johnson replied, glancing toward Penelope with poorly disguised curiosity. And now he's rushing into marriage with, well, you know. Indeed. One has to wonder what he's thinking. Or if he's thinking at all. Mrs. Montgomery's laugh was brittle. Men can be so easily led astray by a pretty face and a sad story. Penelope placed her items on the counter, her hands steady despite the turmoil in her mind. These please, Mr. Montgomery. And I'd like to settle my account for the month. The storekeeper avoided her gaze as he tallied her purchases. Behind her, the women's conversation continued, now shifted to speculation about how long the marriage would last before tragedy struck again. Outside, Penelope took a deep breath of the crisp November air, willing her heart to slow its frantic pace. Was it true? Had William been engaged before? And if so, why hadn't he told her? She walked home slowly, turning the question over in her mind. By the time she reached her cabin, she had decided to ask him directly. Their relationship had been built on honesty. She wouldn't allow gossip to undermine that now. William arrived that evening as planned, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did. Before he could kiss her hello, Penelope stepped back, her expression serious. We need to talk. His smile faded, replaced by concern. What's wrong? Penelope led him inside and gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table. I heard something in town today. About you. She took a seat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They said you were engaged before in Ohio. That you broke it off suddenly. William's expression shifted from concern to understanding, then to resignation. I see Mrs. Montgomery received a response to her letter. Then it's true. Penelope's voice was barely audible. Yes and no. William ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. I was engaged briefly 5 years ago to Emily Wickham, the banker's daughter in my hometown. Why didn't you tell me? Because it was never real, Penelope. William leaned forward, his eyes earnest. My father had just died. The farm was failing. Emily's father offered to save it if I married his daughter. He wanted the connection to my mother's family. They were respected in the community despite their reduced circumstances. Penelope's brow furrowed. So, it was an arrangement, not a love match.
Exactly.
Emily was in love with someone else, the blacksmith's son, who her father considered beneath her. I was just trying to save my mother's home. William's expression darkened at the memory. When I realized I couldn't go through with it, that I couldn't spend my life in a loveless marriage, I broke it off. We lost the farm, but Emily eventually married her blacksmith, and my mother and I headed west. And your mother was heartbroken, as Mrs. Montgomery said? William snorted. My mother was relieved. She never wanted me to sacrifice my future for a piece of land. She was the one who suggested we leave Ohio, start fresh somewhere new. Relief washed over Penelope, followed quickly by shame for having doubted him. I'm sorry. I should have known there was more to the story.
No.
William reached across the table to take her hands. You had every right to ask. I should have told you earlier. It just never seemed important. It was so different from what we have. And what do we have, William? Penelope asked softly, needing to hear him say it again. His grip on her hands tightened. Love, Penelope. Real love, freely given and chosen every day. Not an arrangement, not a convenience, but a bond that will only grow stronger with time. He paused, studying her face. Do you believe me? Penelope looked into his earnest eyes and found nothing but truth there. Yes, she said simply. I believe you. The tension drained from William's shoulders. He stood, pulling her up with him and into his arms. No more secrets between us, Penelope. Not ever. She nodded against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him pine and leather and something uniquely William. No more secrets. That night, after William had gone, Penelope sat by her window watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. The gossip would continue. She had no illusions about that. But it no longer held the power to shake her faith in William or in the future they were building together. 3 weeks later, on a bright, cold Wednesday morning, Penelope Rowe became Penelope James in a simple ceremony at the small church in Clearwater Springs. Only a handful of people attended. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, Mrs. Patterson, several of William's fellow ranch hands, and, somewhat surprisingly, Mr. Montgomery, who came without his wife, but brought a fine china teapot as a wedding gift. Reverend Miller performed the service with professional dignity, if not enthusiasm. William, handsome in a new suit ordered from Helena, watched Penelope walk down the short aisle with such undisguised adoration that even the Reverend's expression softened. Penelope wore a dress of deep blue velvet, also new, with her mother's lace collar and a small cluster of dried wildflowers William had saved from their picnic on Lookout Ridge. As she spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the whispers still circulating through town. After a small reception at the Crawfords' home, William drove Penelope to their new house in a wagon decorated with ribbons by the ranch hands. The structure was simple but solid: 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of both the mountains and the rolling ranch land. Welcome home, Mrs. James, William said, lifting her down from the wagon. Before Penelope could respond, he swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing as he pretended to stagger under her weight. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, with a fire already burning in the grate and a vase of pine branches on the table filling the air with their fresh scent. Penelope's quilts adorned the furniture, and her mother's dishes were arranged on open shelves in the kitchen. It was a perfect blending of their separate lives into one shared future. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, William's arms secure around her, Penelope felt a peace she had thought lost to her forever. Are you happy? William whispered against her hair. Penelope turned in his embrace to face him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. Happier than I believed possible, she admitted. Are you? His answer was a kiss that left no room for doubt. Winter settled over Clearwater Springs with a vengeance, bringing heavy snows and temperatures cold enough to freeze the creek solid. The new James household weathered it well, with William's careful planning ensuring they had ample firewood, preserved food, and supplies to last until spring. Penelope quickly adapted to life on the ranch. She befriended Mrs. Crawford, a no-nonsense woman with a dry wit that matched her husband's, and gradually won the respect of the ranch hands with her excellent cooking and willingness to help when one of them fell ill or needed mending done. William thrived in his role, earning official promotion to foreman in January when old Johnson finally retired. He approached his new responsibilities with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, earning the loyalty of the men under him and the trust of Mr. Crawford. The town's attitude toward the couple slowly began to shift as the months passed without disaster befalling William. Some, like Mrs. Montgomery, maintained their distance, but others began to nod greeting when they encountered Penelope at the general store or post office. By spring, when William and Penelope attended church together each Sunday, they were no longer the subject of obvious whispers or pointed stares. In April, just as the first wildflowers were beginning to appear on the sun-warmed hillsides, Penelope missed her monthly course. She said nothing to William, too afraid to hope, too superstitious to name the possibility aloud. But when May came and went with the same result, and she found herself unable to keep down her breakfast, the truth could no longer be denied. Dr. Harrison, the town's physician who had attended both Jacob and Joshua in their brief lives, confirmed what Penelope already knew. She was with child, due in late November or early December. "Everything appears normal, Mrs. James," he said kindly, packing away his instruments. "But given your history, I'd advise caution. Rest when you can, avoid heavy lifting, and send for me at the first sign of any discomfort." Penelope nodded, her hands protectively cradling her still, flat abdomen. "Do you think? Will this time be different?" The doctor hesitated, his professional caution warring with his desire to offer comfort. "Every pregnancy is different, Mrs. James. And you're stronger now, better nourished, less alone. Those factors all work in your favor." It wasn't the reassurance she had hoped for, but it was honest, and Penelope appreciated that. "Thank you, doctor." That evening, she prepared William's favorite meal, steak, potatoes, and apple pie, and set the table with their best dishes. When he returned from a long day overseeing spring calving, she met him at the door with a kiss that left him pleasantly bemused. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door and washing up at the basin. "Do I need an occasion to cook my husband a good meal?" Penelope countered, suddenly nervous about sharing her news. William studied her face, his expression softening. "No, but there's something different about you tonight. You're practically glowing." Penelope took a deep breath, her hand automatically moving to her stomach. "I saw Dr. Harrison today." William's smile vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" "I'm not ill." Penelope took his hands in hers, gathering her courage. "William, I'm going to have a baby. Our baby. In December." For a moment, William stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, with a whoop that probably startled the chickens in the yard, he lifted Penelope off her feet and spun her in a circle, much as he had the day she agreed to let him court her. "William James, put me down this instant. Did you not hear me say I'm expecting?" He set her down immediately, his face comically contrite. "I'm sorry. Did I hurt you?" "Is the baby? We're fine," Penelope assured him, laughing despite herself. "But perhaps save the acrobatics for after the birth." William placed his hands reverently on her abdomen, his eyes filled with wonder. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." The awe in his voice brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "Yes." "Are you happy about this?" he asked, suddenly serious. "After everything you've been through?" Penelope considered the question honestly. The joy of expectation was inextricably tangled with fear, with memories of two tiny graves on a windswept hill. But beneath both emotions ran a current of determination stronger than either. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I'm happy too. This child is part of you and part of me. A new beginning." William gathered her close, his embrace gentle now, mindful of her condition. "We'll face this together, every step of the way. And whatever happens, Penelope, we'll face that together too." In the shelter of his arms, Penelope allowed herself to believe that this time, things would be different. This time, she wasn't alone, carrying the weight of expectation and fear by herself. This time, she had William, whose steady strength and unwavering love made even the impossible seem manageable. As her pregnancy progressed, that belief was tested again and again. Each milestone brought fresh anxiety, the first fluttering movements at 4 months, the visible rounding of her abdomen at 5, the strong kicks that woke her at night by the 6th month. Each was a reminder of how far she had come with Jacob and Joshua before losing them. William was her rock through all of it. He insisted she rest frequently, took over the heavier household chores, and arranged for one of the ranch hands' wives to come help with laundry and cleaning as Penelope grew larger. At night, he would talk softly to her belly, telling the baby stories about the ranch, about the mountains, about the life that awaited it. Dr. Harrison visited regularly, pronouncing everything normal but watching Penelope with vigilant eyes. The town, hearing of her condition, held its collective breath. Even Mrs. Montgomery, encountering a heavily pregnant Penelope at the general store in October, offered a stiff but sincere wish for a healthy child. As November arrived with the first snows of winter, Penelope prepared the small room adjacent to their bedroom as a nursery. She unwrapped the baby quilts she had made during long summer afternoons, hung curtains at the window, and placed a rocking chair by the crib William had crafted with his own hands. Each item was an act of faith, a declaration that this time would be different. Yet she couldn't bring herself to unpack the tiny clothes she had sewn, keeping them instead in a trunk at the foot of the crib, as if waiting until the last possible moment to commit fully to the hope they represented. William found her there one evening, standing in the nursery doorway, one hand supporting her aching back, the other resting on her enormous belly. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, using the endearment he had adopted in recent months. Penelope leaned back against him as his arms encircled her from behind. "I was thinking about names." William rested his chin on top of her head. "Any ideas? If it's a girl, I thought perhaps Grace, after my mother." "Grace James." William tested the name. "It's beautiful. And for a boy." Penelope hesitated. "I hadn't decided." "What do you think of William, after his father?" William shook his head firmly. "No, I've never been fond of children named directly after their parents. It leads to confusion." "Then perhaps James as a middle name?" Penelope suggested. "And something strong for his first name." "What about Joseph?" William suggested after a moment's thought. "It means God will add. Seems fitting for the child who's being added to our family against all odds." Joseph James. Penelope rolled the name around in her mind, finding it solid and hopeful. "I like it." Then it settled. Grace for a girl, Joseph for a boy. William placed his hand over hers on her belly, feeling the strong movements of their child. "He or she is certainly active tonight." "He or she is always active," Penelope replied with a rueful smile. "Especially when I'm trying to sleep. Just practicing for ranch life. Early to rise. Full of energy." The baby gave a particularly strong kick, as if in agreement, making them both laugh. In that moment, standing in the doorway of the nursery they had prepared with such careful hope, Penelope allowed herself to believe completely that this child would live, would thrive, would grow up strong and healthy in this house filled with love. 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold night with stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky, Penelope went into labor. William sent one of the ranch hands galloping toward town to fetch Dr. Harrison while he helped her walk slowly around their bedroom, breathing through each contraction as they came, steady and strong. The doctor arrived within the hour, his breath frosting in the night air as he hurried into the house. After examining Penelope, he nodded approvingly. "Everything is progressing normally, Mrs. James. This little one seems eager to meet you." The labor lasted through the night and into the following day, longer than with either Jacob or Joshua. Penelope alternated between fear that something was wrong and hope that the difference was a good sign. William never left her side, wiping her brow, supporting her through each contraction, murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. As the winter sun began to set on the second day, Dr. Harrison announced that it was time to push. Penelope gathered her remaining strength, clutching William's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You can do this, Penny," William whispered against her temple. "You're the strongest person I know." With a final, determined effort, Penelope brought their child into the world. The room filled with the lusty cry of a healthy infant, the sound she had dreamed of hearing for so long. "A girl," Dr. Harrison announced, his professional demeanor cracking to reveal a broad smile. "A beautiful, healthy girl." William's face was transformed with wonder as the doctor placed the squalling, red-faced infant on Penelope's chest. "She's perfect," he breathed, one finger gently tracing their daughter's tiny cheek. Penelope couldn't speak through her tears as she cradled the small, warm weight of their child. Grace Elizabeth James had a shock of dark hair, her father's determined chin, and, when she finally opened them, her mother's blue eyes. The first week passed in a blur of feeding, changing, and staring in awe at the miraculous being they had created.
Despite Dr.
Harrison's assurances that Grace was robust and healthy, Penelope could not bring herself to sleep deeply, waking at the slightest sound to check that her daughter was still breathing. William, understanding without being told, moved the cradle next to their bed and took turns with Penelope keeping watch through the night. During the day, he arranged his duties at the ranch to allow him to return home frequently, bringing reports of Grace's activities to the amused ranch hands as if each yawn and gurgle were a remarkable achievement. As the weeks passed and Grace not only survived but thrived, Penelope began to relax her vigilance slightly. By the time spring arrived, bringing new calves to the ranch and fresh green shoots to the garden, Grace was a chubby, smiling 3-month-old who bore no resemblance to her fragile brothers. On a warm May afternoon, William found Penelope sitting on a blanket in the garden, Grace propped against her legs, both of them enjoying the sunshine. The sight of his wife and daughter, both healthy and happy, still had the power to stop his heart momentarily. "There are my girls," he said, lowering himself to the blanket beside them. Grace kicked her legs excitedly at the sight of her father, earning a laugh from both parents. "She's been watching the butterflies," Penelope said, stroking their daughter's dark curls. "I swear she follows them with her eyes." "Of course she does. She's the smartest baby in the territory." William tickled Grace's round belly, delighting in her toothless grin. "How are you feeling today?" "Good." Penelope leaned against his shoulder. "Better than good, actually. I feel
whole."
William wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You know, I've been thinking." "Always a dangerous activity," Penelope teased, settling more comfortably against him. "I've been thinking about the future, about our family." William's voice took on a more serious tone. "The foreman's cottage is perfect for now, but if we have more children, when—" Penelope interrupted softly. "When we have more children." William's arm tightened around her, his joy at her words evident in his embrace. "When we have more children, we might want more space." Crawford mentioned that the eastern section of the ranch, near Pine Creek, might be available if I wanted to buy in as a partner rather than just foreman. Penelope sat up straighter, turning to face him. "A partner?" William, that's wonderful. But can we afford it? Not yet. William's expression was thoughtful. But in a few years, with careful saving. Crawford's offering good terms because he wants me to stay on long term. And that land would be perfect good water, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds, plenty of room for a bigger house as the children grow. Children, Penelope echoed, her heart full. It still seems like a miracle that we have one. One miracle so far. William lifted Grace into his arms, raising her above his head as she giggled. But I have a feeling there are more miracles in store for the James family. Looking at her husband and daughter silhouetted against the clear blue Montana sky, Penelope knew he was right. The path that had led her through unimaginable grief to this moment of pure joy had been long and difficult, but she wouldn't change it if she could. Every step, even the most painful, had brought her here to William, to Grace, to the family they were building together. More miracles, she agreed, reaching up to take her daughter's small hand in hers. And we'll be ready for each one. Epilogue 10 years later, June 1883, the sprawling ranch house on Pine Creek echoed with laughter as Penelope James attempted to corral her children for the family portrait. William had commissioned a traveling photographer to capture the family on their 10th wedding anniversary, and the occasion called for Sunday best and best behavior, both proving elusive on this bright summer day. Joseph James, if you get those trousers dirty before the photograph, there will be consequences, Penelope called to her 8-year-old son, who was dangerously close to the creek bank in his pursuit of a particularly interesting frog. I just want to show it to Henry, Mama. Joseph protested, his father's determined chin jutting forward stubbornly. Henry is too young for frogs, Penelope replied firmly. Now come away from that water before too late. Joseph's foot slipped on the muddy bank, sending him sliding into the shallow creek with a yelp of surprise followed immediately by delighted laughter. Penelope sighed, turning to her eldest daughter. Grace, please fetch your brother a clean pair of trousers from his room. The blue ones on the chair. Grace, a solemn 10-year-old with her father's brown hair and her mother's thoughtful blue eyes, nodded and hurried toward the house, her own carefully pressed dress swishing around her ankles. And tell your father we'll be delayed. Again. Penelope called after her, then turned her attention to her youngest children, 4-year-old twins Henry and Hannah, who were sitting remarkably still on the porch steps, watching the unfolding drama with identical expressions of interest on their small faces. At least you two are staying clean, Penelope said, adjusting Hannah's bonnet and straightening Henry's collar. That's because Papa said we could have maple candy if we were good for the picture, Hannah informed her mother matter-of-factly. Did he now? Penelope raised an eyebrow, fighting a smile. William's weakness for their children was well known, his stern foreman's demeanor dissolving the moment he crossed the threshold of their home. The sound of a wagon approaching drew everyone's attention. Joseph, dripping wet but unrepentant, scrambled up the bank as Mr. and Mrs. Crawford's buggy came into view. They're early, Penelope exclaimed, quickly assessing the state of her family and finding it woefully unprepared for company. William emerged from the barn just then, looking handsome in a Sunday suit despite the hay clinging to his sleeves. He took in the scene at a glance: his soaked son, his wife's exasperated expression, the approaching visitors, and burst into laughter. Some things never change, he said, crossing to Penelope and pressing a quick kiss to her temple. I'll greet the Crawfords. You see to our soggy explore. By the time the photographer had set up his equipment on the front lawn, order had been restored. Joseph, now dry and only slightly subdued, stood between his parents. Grace held Hannah's hand on one side, while William balanced Henry on his hip on the other. The Crawfords, honored guests at this family milestone, stood slightly to one side. Hold still, please, the photographer instructed from beneath his black cloth. The exposure takes time. Penelope felt William's hand slip into hers behind Joseph's back, a reassuring squeeze that spoke volumes. She squeezed back, her heart too full for words. 10 years. 10 years of joy and challenge, of growth and change, of building a life and a family that had once seemed an impossible dream. The Pine Creek Ranch was thriving under William's partnership with Crawford. Their home, built with love and attention to detail, had expanded as their family grew. And Penelope herself had blossomed from the grief-stricken widow of Clearwater Springs into a confident ranch wife, respected in the community and adored by her family. Just a moment longer, the photographer called. Almost done. Penelope glanced at the faces around her. Grace, serious and responsible beyond her years. Joseph, barely containing his energy even for the camera. The twins, miraculously sitting still for once. And William, her William, whose love had never wavered, whose faith in her had never faltered. The town gossips had long since found other subjects for their whispers. The story of the cursed widow and the cowboy who married her anyway had given way to newer tales. Now, when people spoke of the James family, they mentioned William's skill with horses, Penelope's award-winning preserves at the county fair, Grace's remarkable talent for mathematics, or Joseph's adventurous spirit. No one crossed the street to avoid her now. No one whispered behind their hands when she entered the general store. And if occasionally, on the anniversary of Jacob's or Joshua's births, the old fear resurfaced, the dread that happiness was fleeting, that loss was inevitable, William was always there to hold her through the night, to remind her that love was stronger than grief, that joy could follow sorrow as surely as spring followed winter. There, the photographer announced, emerging from behind his equipment. A fine family portrait, Mrs. James. You should be proud. Penelope looked at her husband, at their children, at the life they had built together against all odds. I am, she said simply, more proud than I can say. Later that evening, after the Crawfords had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Penelope and William sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, the rhythm of the swing as familiar and comforting as his heartbeat beneath her ear. Happy anniversary, Penny, William murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Happy anniversary. She tilted her face up to his, marveling as she often did that time had only made him more handsome in her eyes, the silver threading through his brown hair adding distinction, the lines at the corners of his eyes speaking of a life filled with laughter. Did you ever imagine, that day at the cemetery, that we'd end up here? William's arms tightened around her. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were someone special, someone worth knowing. The rest, he gestured toward the house where their children slept, the ranch that surrounded them, the life they had created together. This is beyond even what I dared to hope for. For me too. Penelope settled back against him, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. Thank you for not believing in curses. William chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. Thank you for believing in us instead. As the night deepened around them, Penelope James, once called cursed, now called blessed, closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man who had seen past her grief to the woman beneath, for the children who filled her days with chaos and her heart with joy, and for the love that had healed what once seemed broken beyond repair.